Hello and welcome to Hammering the Point. I am your host, Warboss Toon Smasher, followed by my co-hosts,
Jack the Electro Priest, and the Commissar.
And today's episode is Episode 1, The War in Heaven. Strap those Imperial boots on. We're going to war!
So the War in Heaven was one of the greatest wars that ever happened within the universe that kind of kicked off a lot of things within the universe. It involved quite a lot of the races you will see throughout the series, specifically the Eldari, the Necrons, and the Proto-Orcs, or the Quarks. This is basically the whole what started off a lot of the issues that happens in 40K because of this war. The people who were in this war are primarily the old ones who kind of kicked off a lot of the life within the universe.
The old ones are like one of the oldest known races. Kind of like, no, not like technically the first like oldest race, but definitely like the oldest first known. Kind of like they were like frog-like people too.
See, that I didn't know. I know that they were the first recorded species to cross what they call the Sea of Stars, and I believe they also crafted the Proto-Webway, which we don't know. We haven't discussed the Webway yet, but it's a very important way for space travel to happen without things going horrendously wrong.
That was known as the Realm of Souls to begin with.
So, where would you guys say this war really kicked off?
Well, it really kicked off when, humanoid, known as the Necron tier, they lived on a planet that was radiation burnt. All kinds of different cancers were going on. Their species really didn't... What?
He's trying to unplug your computer.
Oh. All different kinds of skin diseases were just riddled within all the planets around there from the sun.
Yeah. Imagine basically our planet without a magnetosphere. You're just constantly getting radiation. And
it's horrible.
They didn't. What was going on?
Or ozone. That's what keeps us from getting irradiated.
Right. The ozone, not the magnetosphere. But yeah, so they're just getting, their DNA ripped apart by radiation every second they're alive.
They didn't really have a long lifespan.
And the old ones did, and I'm pretty sure that's why they got mad.
Well, they had got mad because they had developed some technology to where they could, it was their first known technology was kind of not like time travel, time
manipulation.
But time manipulation, thank you.
So basically, the reason what kicked off the war is the old ones ended up traveling to various planets and seeding them because one of their passions were creating life. They wanted to see what they could do.
They had to make that baby batter fly.
So they basically, every time they would hit a planet in the solar system, they would try to seed it with life. If it wasn't for them, humans wouldn't exist in this universe and a lot of the other races. As they were putting along the universe, they came across the Necrons' homeworld. They reached out for help, the Necrons, and
Necron tier.
Well, yeah. And being the old ones, since they like to kind of stay away from, in a sense, their creations or stay away from life and just be impartial observers, refuse to help them.
That's such a god complex. I hate that.
What do you expect? They're ancient toad-like race. So that really pissed off the Necrons, and instead of, handling it better, they decided to go to war with them. And for the first million so years probably of the conflict, the Necrons were not winning at all.
No, they kept getting their ass handed to them
because
the Eldari, the old ones recruited the Eldari to help them fight the wars
because they did not have a very strong psychic presence, and the Eldari did.
No, they're actually very powerfully psychic.
No, they're powerful psychically.
They're not physically powerful.
I gotta read from a better source material.
The old ones weren't able to go on the actual front lines and fight because they were getting their asses handed to them. But the help of the Eldari really brought forth.
Not that it's hard to kill cancer boys.
No, really not. But when they're pretty pissed off,
Yeah, so that basically happened, and as they were losing the war, they the Necrons found these interesting creatures that exist around their death sun called the Catan, and they were gaseous entities that absorbed radiation. They had this specific kind of metal. I forgot the name of it.
So they made the metal itself. It was a living metal known as the necrodermis. They were also morphable, so that way the Catan could actually be essentially brought to physical life. And then because the Catan fed off the suns and the radiation just kind of floating around. But once they were put into their necrodermis, their appetite basically came from consuming fart gas on the suns to, oh, hey, life seems tasty. And then they just started eating people, which essentially then the Catan kind of looked at the Necrontyr and were like, hey, you want to fight this big battle? Work for us. And the Silent King, who led the Silent King is the leader of all the Necrons, well, the Necrontyr, and he kind of basically signed a quote-unquote contract with the Catan to help, because he was also looking for immortality for his race, so that way they could keep living. And the Catan offered, hey, since you built this for us, we'll basically help make all these for you, and help you fight this big battle against the old ones, to which the Silent King was like, all right, fine. And once that happened, the Catan basically ate all their souls and put them into living metal, to which that's when the Necrontyr officially became the Necrons underneath the Catan.
Yeah, and it cost them a lot. I had read slightly differently that they had become Necrons with the deal. I thought that the Catan were like, yeah, we'll give you immortality if you go to war with us, but that probably is leaving out a huge chunk of...
Well, that's basically assuming the contract that was made.
Yeah, but either
they
way...
were, of course, tricked into it, because now the Catan
it was a
were
bad
like,
deal.
Exactly, because now we know all that you do, and we ate your tasty souls.
Yeah, and it
you
cost
are now
them,
ours.
It let them... Because they were... The Necrontyr were extremely... fractioned. They had lots of different cultures and societies that were all waging war against each other, and so they needed to be united. But uniting them, it cost them their free will. Essentially.
So as the war boss said, there was a character named the Silent King, and he was surprisingly very powerful, and he had one of the stronger dynasties that existed in the well, at least in their planet, and he was the one who kind of, in a sense, brought all the other dynasties together because they were all warring with each other. And he was one of the first ones to make contact with the Catan. And the Catan has been around since the universe started. There are just energy-esque beings that were diametrically opposed to the
old ones?
The old ones, because as the old ones wanted to bring life into the universe, the Catan basically wanted to just extinct it. That's not a word.
They wanted to
unalive the universe by eating it.
Pretty much. So
because radiation does not taste as good as souls, apparently.
So as I said, they found them munching on the radioactive energy of their sun, and they came into contact and gave them bodies, and they're like, hey, can you help us fight this war against the old ones, which the Catan was all over because they don't like the old ones.
Okay, so their bodies did come first. Did they lose their free will with the bodies, or did they lose that later?
They lost that later when they started the whole becoming Necrons. When the Catan finally got their bodies, they convinced the other ones to go this route, because it basically, in a sense, made them resistant to the psychic powers of the Eldari and the old ones.
That's why they confused. That's very interesting
in a way. So they were also called star gods in the Necrontyr language.
For all you Mass Effect fans, shoot the Star Child.
Sure.
Anyways, they don't know what I'm talking about. Continue.
So as the time went on, there was a specific Catan called the Deceiver, and he was the one who, in a sense, kind of started a lot of shenanigans within the universe. So once the Necrons figured out, oh god, we no longer... Well, at least the bigger ones, like the Silent King and a lot of the named ones, somehow managed to keep their personality. while being encased into the souls, or the soulless suits of armor. There was multiples of them, but one of the big ones was a one called the Deceiver, who actively tried to not only screw with the old ones, but he also liked to screw with his other Catan brethren. And
nice.
He got a bunch of them to eat each other towards the end of it.
Nice.
He convinced all the higher ones, like
the Void Dragon.
The Void Dragon. There was the Void Dragon, the Deceiver, of course. The Nightbringer was another one. Basically, all the higher ones started eating all the lesser ones.
Remember, kids, cannibalism is not cool.
After the Deceiver convinced them to start eating the lesser Catan, that's when they kind of started losing the war. And but at that point, the Necrons had waged war against the Catan. But we'll probably go over that a little bit later, because that's kind of jumping ahead throughout the War in Heaven.
Yeah.
Fair.
So now that we covered a bit about the Necrons and their antics, we should probably cover at least some of the stuff about the Eldar, probably, or the Eldari.
And I know very little about that one, so you guys have to take the lead. I do know.
Well, I do know that like the Eldari and the Old Ones, they they didn't really like each other, but they didn't dislike each other. They were just kind of like, all right, you exist in this universe, I exist in this universe. It's cool. We have no quarrels. Because essentially, when they had met, Eldari were just kind of trying to populate their race, and the Old Ones were just trying to make their own races. Of course, until the big war started and all that, the Old Ones recruited the Eldari to help them.
I do remember that the Eldari had a name for, I believe, the Catan. It was Yingir? I don't know. It doesn't matter. But they I do remember one thing, that they said that the Old Ones had made a Garden of Eden for them, and then the Necrons just completely nuked it away. So I imagine that probably allowed them to side with the Old Ones a little bit easier in the war.
Oh yeah, of course. And well, the Eldari were, since they were so psychically in tuned, the Old Ones showed them like the Webway Gate, which leads to the Realm of Souls at the time.
Right, the important
that was
space
where
travel.
they drew all the Psyker powers too. Drew from there.
Oh jeez.
Because that evolved into what would be known as the Warp, which we'll talk about here in a little bit towards the end of the episode.
Yeah, that's really important later. Commissar?
So as you know, the Old Ones basically created everything. They even helped create the first versions of the Eldar, which then those Eldar became the first gods of the Eldar. And the Webway is basically a thing in between dimensions. It's not in the realm of souls. It's a way to subvert it because of how it works.
Okay, that's right.
So basically, the Eldar showed up. They had great promise. The Old Ones really liked them, so they started basically, in a sense, forming a kind of a
coalition.
A coalition with each other, because they're one of the only races that actually remember the Old One outside of the Necrons, because of how long-lived they are. So basically, the Eldar started helping the Old Ones in the war, and they were a very proud and glorious race. But then bad things happened to them ultimately, but we'll cover that later in the fall of the Eldari race. They came up with a specific material called Wraithbone, which was, if I remember correctly, made out of the dead, if I remember correctly.
I think so, because they started making that once the war was happening, and just once the Necron tier became the Necrons, their psychic powers weren't doing too much good onto the Necrons.
Right, because the Necrons were like masters of the material plane.
Well, not only just that, because the Necrons, with the technology that they were given, and with the help of the Catan, they were able to basically make weapons that harness the sun.
And for you kids who've seen Star Wars.
Ooh, boy. Whoa. But with all of this in mind, though, the old ones ended up making a new race. One that they could just throw right on the battlefield and fight endlessly. One that could withstand all kinds of punishment. Which then was known as the Kroks, as we know them today. The Orcs.
The Necrons made the
Since
Orcs?
shortening names is a thing.
Or was it the old ones?
It was the old ones.
It's the old ones that made the Orcs, okay.
Yeah, the old ones, well, at the time they were known as the Kroks.
Right, the proto-Orcs, sorry.
Exactly. The
Krorks, God, it's spelled Krorks. All of you try and pronounce that and get back to me.
Kroks. Anyway, the Kroks were the beginning of the Orcs, but the Kroks Orcs were always known for, if they believe it's real, it will happen.
Yeah.
That came from the Kroks because the old ones gave the Kroks so much power in order to go to battle for them.
Right, yeah.
So
it was like a last-ditch effort.
Oh yeah, because they loved war. They basically made them berserkers and forgot to install the fucking off switch.
Yeah, I read that they had armor equal to Horus Heresy's 30k Space Marines, and they were huge.
Oh yeah, they were about twice the size of the average orc boy now.
And weren't they the reason that you guys have what are the little ones called?
The Gretchens?
Didn't they?
The
I think it was the Gretchens and the Grots. Weren't they initially enslaved by the Krorks? That's what I don't know.
No, that really spawned more off of spores at the end because they mostly made the race just to fucking go right in.
Right. So that's fair. They weren't trying to domesticate. That's
fair. No, they created them for war and destruction.
Yeah, that's.
But they also made them at the time intelligent enough to be able to do battle strategies too, because they needed these guys to not just go in. I mean, they can go in and die and keep coming in,
right?
But they still wanted them to at least go in, fuck some shit up.
And were there any major battles that we know of that were won by the Krorks?
Not really.
They were just kind of a nuisance at the end.
Pretty much,
yeah.
A lot of the wars are vague within it because of how long it's been since.
It was a war, wasn't it? 5 or 6 million.
The war lasted for about 5 million years, and this is taking place after about 60 million years in the past of current date
in
way 40K.
Oh yeah, this is way.
So sadly, a lot of the stuff, at least the battles, we don't know a lot about. So we can ultimately only speculate about how a lot of the battles. We know who ultimately won, which was the Necrons. They ultimately did defeat the old ones.
A couple, and then the old ones kind of took off.
Well, what was left of the old ones left to the web gate and never been seen again, because towards the end of the conflict is what we know is that the old ones started falling to not only the Necrons but to parasitic warp entities.
Oh, right. So yeah, we should talk about how them seeding all of these worlds actually turned out to be kind of a problem, because when they started losing and the webway was, I don't know if it was unstable or no, it was the Sea of Souls.
Yeah.
All of this chaos from all of these battles and all of these different races with all of this psychic energy caused horrendous entities to emerge from the Sea of Souls.
There were so many deaths that it caused it to basically freak out and break into what we now know as it warped into the warp.
Yeah, it turned into the warp, which is why the webway is so important, because the warp is just full of hellspawn demons. So
yeah, basically it's more like the war in heaven kind of caused stirrings within the warp, and the warp is the exact opposite of the material realm. It's an immaterial realm, so a lot of negative emotions or happy emotions can ultimately affect it. So since this war was so brutal, it started an apotheosis of what we would perceive as the chaos gods soon.
Yeah, it's like the proto-chaos,
pretty much. It's what started off the whole chaos gods. It was that.
So yeah, that helped a big time with the fall of the old ones. They didn't just start losing randomly.
Yeah. But
No.
towards the end of it, they started falling prey to parasitic warp entities that specifically went after psychers to feed off of them, and that kind of spelt the end for pretty much 99% of the old ones. And there's speculation that there's a few of them still left that are just hiding in the webway, because warp entities have a harder time getting into the webway than any other, because it's kind of just they slip between both the material and the immaterial. It's just like riding the line in between.
Right.
So ultimately, the Necron tier ended up winning, and the Silent King saw what all of the Necrons
Had become.
Because he-
and how he became slowly but surely disillusioned with the Catan, that he waged the war against the Star Gods, or the Catan, to destroy them and shatter them, or at least their physical bodies, and trap them in those shards to this day. So that's
They were
pretty much
pretty
what happened
successful. I think there was, like 4 Catan left at the end of that.
to them. Yeah.
Well, yeah, because during all of that, towards the end, that's when the Deceiver had tricked all the higher ones into eating all the lower ones.
Good times.
And then while they were all being eaten by the higher Catan, the Silent King felt so much shame into what his race had become, because he achieved immortality, but at what cost?
Yeah, literally, like, you have no more free will, or at least your people don't.
Well, exactly, because like the regular standard warriors, they have no free will.
Yeah,
they have no free thought.
it was,
They're basically dead to the world. But like higher up, like
The
especially the
reanimation
Silent
protocols.
King, oh yeah, because like when the Necrons, because they are so technologically advanced and their bodies themselves, when they would fall in battle, they would they have what is known as repair protocols or reanimation, because their bodies would begin to build depending on how much of their, of course, if too much of their body was destroyed, then they would be either warped back up to their home world.
Oh,
which
wow,
is
so
known
it's like
as
a
the tomb world,
like a
so that way they
legitimate
could come
hive
to
mind.
repair. Exactly. Or if it doesn't get to it, then the body can be destroyed.
Well, goodness.
But with all that, the Silent King had realized his whole race is just gone.
Right.
So that's when he had waged war against the Catan and all the Star Gods.
And then, where were we going with that?
I'm just saying, like, what this is all happening during, with like what's going on with the old ones.
Yeah.
Because essentially they were winning, but that's when the Silent King was like, "Nope, fuck this. You guys destroyed my race. This is not what I wanted." And that's when he had, like Commissar said, shattered most of the Catan, and they all just went. The Void Dragon itself, wasn't it like 80% shattered?
Yeah, no. The Void Dragon kind of, I think it was ended up shattering. But
Now, for somebody who's unfamiliar, what is the Void Dragon? I don't think
Void
The Void Dragon is the strongest Catan.
That's right.
Or
He
at
was
least
one of
them.
He was one of them.
He was a Catan, and he actually ended up, I think, escaping because later down in the timeline, the Emperor of Mankind, which we will cover, he ends up fighting an entity called the Void Dragon and sealing it in Mars.
Oh wow. Okay. So yeah, the Void Dragon really important. He
so
might have
we'll-
made
Yeah, he's the main one out of all of them.
it. And then, gosh.
But of course, while that was all going down, after the Catan were defeated, the Silent King, basically, that's when he told literally all of the Necrons return to their worlds, which is known as Tomb Worlds, and they all fell into hibernation, because at that point, so much destruction happened that if they went to try and go conquer more, they didn't have the manpower.
I
So
see.
they needed all this time for, of course, everyone to be repaired, but more people made, stuff like that, because all the Tomb Worlds were
manufacturing.
basically, yeah, because they kind of helped create more and more Necrons.
Right. Yeah. Because now that they're mindless husks, you don't need new Necron tier. You just make more Necron.
Yep.
But a lot of times, when a Tomb World will wake up, it will actually start assimilating the other biological, at least sentient creatures into more Necrons to grow their
Interesting.
armies. Yeah.
Well, it makes sense. It's
a whole nother sphere we'll get.
That's why then
deeper
everybody doesn't
into.
like the Necrons. It's not just because they're trying to conquer everything. It's because they're trying to eat everything.
This ain't the Tyranids.
Well, Tyranids are different kind of eaters. These ones are assimilators. These are like the Borg, I guess.
Basically, and a little fact, the closest thing that we have to the Necrons in Warhammer Fantasy is the Tomb Kings, which are kind of beat for beat similar to it. It was an Egyptian-like society who was obsessed with death and immortality. So that is the fantasy equivalent to the Necrons. They're just
fun.
skeletons.
Oh, good times. Instead of living like metal skeletons, they just have like cockroaches as their bodies.
No, it's just normal.
Just joking. I'm just
bone
joking.
constructs of all kinds.
Just imagining a freaking. I've been watching too much of Brandon Fraser's The Mummy.
Fair enough.
But yeah, so basically the Necrons needed to repair themselves, so they all
They
started
went
retreating, and that was really interesting for everyone else because they were like, wow, the gods are leaving, and all of the kids have to look after for themselves now.
Yeah, because the Silent King put everybody on a timer for 60 million years.
Which
because
allowed...
he figured
Oh, go
in
ahead.
that time the universe could become plump and juicy again for them to go out and conquer.
And oh boy, did it. Just more so than they expected.
Oh, yeah.
Well, that and the Tomb Worlds themselves were actually, as they were waking up now, a lot of them are defunct or destroyed because, isn't it?
No, a lot of them actually ended up getting
no,
colonized
they
by
did.
humans.
Oh.
Which will be happening
I was
later.
just reading.
That
I was
we
reading
will
in the
have to-
Necron Codex that a bunch of them are like destroyed from lava entering the chambers.
Yeah,
or,
like a
or
lot of the
planets
tombs
being
themselves
flung.
have been destroyed, but
Okay.
the planets are still, a lot of them are still there,
Interesting.
Oh,
but
no,
have been
good,
colonized.
And that's why the Necrons are so
There's
fractured
a lot
themselves.
more planets than people realize too.
Oh, yeah,
But
they're-
that will have to be covered
Another
in
time.
the actual like Necron episode.
Fair
because
enough.
That delves into a whole new thing. But while they went into basically the 60 million year hibernation, of course none of the other races knew how long they were going to sleep for. But once they went and slept, the Krorks, with no one else left to fight, kind of turned on the old ones, and they were getting attacked. Also,
That
like
sucks.
Commissar had said, by the warp entities attacking them. So they were kind of getting attacked on all sides at that point. It's also when the Eldari, they basically kind of saw the universe and went, okay, cool, we can do what we want. And they started,
Dad's gone. Time to throw a party.
basically, but they started to become the dominant race in the universe at the time. But then I also know that during that time, they really got into like the arts, because at first, war and everything was good for them, but once that had went away, they really went into like the science.
They basically
and
had
arts.
a golden age after the war was over, which is
Oh yeah,
common.
I mean, they had fun too, but once war was gone, there's really nothing left to do. What else are you going to do?
Yeah, they basically ultimately ended up
Cultural renaissance.
pretty much. They started becoming more widespread than ever, and they started making these things called pleasure planets, and they were just hedonistic
Nice.
planets where they can divulge into anything they want. Which
Were they
ultimately,
the only ones with access to the webway at the time?
Yes, because
Yeah, that's
basically
important.
Because the old ones
they
gave
became
them the blueprint of
Well,
the
no.
webway. Well,
they became the inheritors of the
And I'm pretty sure
webway.
they improved it
because
too.
pretty much all the webway gates were already made, because as soon as they started making their own planets, which were the craft worlds, they already had webway gates in them because the old ones helped them make it. So they became the inheritors of the webway because now that the last of the old ones basically just left in panic to try to at least try to recuperate what their losses was, they in a sense ensured that the Eldari, their most trusted creation at the time, would continue basically in a sense their great plan. So that's why they became inheritors of the webway. So
makes sense.
they started basically spreading all over the galaxy since now they had unbridled access to the webway gates, and they just basically kind of went a bit buck wild
All the races really did, honestly, but mostly the Eldar.
Well, yeah. Humans weren't really a big player in all this just yet because they were still going through the evolutionary chain because the old ones seeded
Yeah, this was like the dawn of our civilization.
By the time that the Eldar were having their fun, I think we were in the medieval era of that time. So ultimately ended up they became very hedonistic and very just like, oh, look at us, we're gonna be as wild as humanly possible.
Oh no.
And that kind of spelt the downfall of them, which is never a good idea for a psychically charged race. Ultimately, towards the end of their whole sphere, which we'll get more into
now, but this is kind of like the end of the war in heaven, really.
Yeah.
This is like the tale.
So the Necron is asleep. The Quarks have fought themselves to basically extinction, or at least that's what the Eldari thought. And now that they are the quote-unquote prominent race of the universe, they are basically just spreading out and becoming one of the most dominant races of that current era. And we'll cover more of it later in the series when we actually cover a episode specifically for the Eldari, which will recover a lot of the stuff that we talk about in this first episode.
Yeah.
This episode's just about what's going on and the timeline of the universe.
This is the setup for literally everything that's going on in 40K, because this is way pre-40K.
It is, and we just wanted to kind of give you guys like a... When you delve into Warhammer 40K, there's so much, like, they talk about the Horus Heresy, which is involved in the timeline.
Commissar, how many books does the Horus Heresy make up now? 86?
Oh, there's a lot. I know that there's 338 books in the entirety of the Warhammer books.
Yes.
I don't know how many of them are.
I'm pretty sure it's something like 70 to 80 books are just the Horus Heresy.
Oh yeah, no, there's quite a bit, but this is just more in terms of trying to get the information out there of, hey, when people talk about 40K and they mention all this is what kind of led up to the history of everything.
So yeah, is there any last minute things we want to say? I think we pretty much covered all the main topics.
Well, I think at this point, it's kind of not like really like a repeat, but more like a recap of everything in the episode to kind of mash it all together.
Fair enough. So, what is the war in heaven? Let's recap. I would be bad at recapping.
So the war in heaven was a conflict of a selfish godlike race versus a dying race. And it just happened to be the dying race managed to get out on top because of...
After much sacrifice.
Yeah, after much sacrifice, and also the fact that they decided to give up their entire humanity to fight this godlike race.
All to reach the immortality of inhumanity.
Yep.
There's a moral in there somewhere. You guys can figure it out on your own.
No, but basically the Necron tier turning into the Necrons... fighting against the old ones, the Eldari and the Quarks. Millions and millions of people dying. Billions of people, honestly, at that point. The war lasted 5 million years in total. Once the Necron tier had turned into the Necrons and started killing off more and more on the old one's side, the Quarks were made to help fight off them, which the Eldari fought with them, and then the Wraithbone that Commissar had mentioned in the beginning is what helped the Eldari fight off against the Necrons. So that way it was more of an even fight and they could start killing off. But then once the old ones started getting attacked from the entities and the warp, the Necrons started fighting off the Catan, leading off all of them to kind of go in their own civil war. And then I had I was going pretty well, and my brain.
Well, basically, the warp started opening up with really horrendous psyker beings, and that really affected the old one's ability to wage warfare, and it also really affected everyone in the long run. And so they retreated with the few numbers they had left, and then the Necrons retreated with the few numbers that they had left with their victory, if you could call one that, when you have to retreat and go into hibernation. And then
to
it
kill
left
off people in 60 million years.
Yeah, and then you've got all
that number is important.
All the old ones' children, which would be mostly the Eldari and the Quarks, but also the humans.
Quarks just fought themselves out, basically. They did kind of fight themselves out to extinction.
They ran out of people to fight, and then they went.
They
did,
and that's when they kind of started to deteriorate a bit within themselves.
Quarks to orcs. Interesting.
But we'll cover how that kind of happened in more of an orcs episode.
Yeah, no one ever wants to face an orc. It's bad.
The more we talk about orcs, the more I want a rogue.
God damn. So yeah, and then all the babies were left to fend for themselves. Welcome to prehistory.
Yeah, pretty much. There's really not much more to talk about outside of a few more other things outside of like what happens after this, but we are going to do a 4-parter kind of thing.
We just want to section it out, kind of what we feel like would be a better...
We're just trying to give everybody a good overview before we delve into it, because it's so confusing and complex. So, we'll be back with another episode to go over the next, 20,000, 30,000 years.
Well, yeah, at least the next 60 million.
There we go. So yeah, we'll see you guys next time. The point has been hammered home.